in the last video, I asked you if you wanted me to make another video about Britney and her family, and most of you did, so that's what this video is going to be about. Since my last video, Jamie Spears' lawyer has come forward and said that there have been no findings on Britney's capacity. That's really big news, because what it means is that nobody, no psychiatrist, no psychologist has found during assessments that Britney took that she lacks the mental capacity to understand court proceedings. So for the last 13 years, she hasn't been allowed her own lawyer until last month. And before then, she was represented by a lawyer that the court chose for her, Sam Ingham. And he'd given her advice not to speak out as she did last month. And the reason, according to Britney, was that the clinic that had held her might sue her for saying that she'd been forced to work. So now, is that true? Could they sue her? I mean, it doesn't sound like they have so far. It does seem suspicious that he would give her that advice, and that he hasn't applied to terminate the conservatorship for all of these years that she's been wanting to get out of it, especially considering that he profits from her being in it, or he did when he was her lawyer. So for all of these years that Jamie Spears was aware that Britney both wanted to get out of the conservatorship desperately and hadn't been shown to lack the mental capacity to understand what was going on in court, he chose to never speak up. It's also really disturbing that these different judges allowed her to stay in a conservatorship and to not choose her own lawyer when information like that was lacking. If you haven't seen my last video, please watch it, because I refer to examples I used in that video in this one. So I'll put a link under this video. I'm actually holding a microphone in my hand and the traffic is so loud here. So I'm using this unidirectional mic, which I don't have a stand for, to see if I can get rid of the traffic noises. So in the last video, I talked about why the court decided that Britney lacked the capacity to hire her own lawyer, for instance. And I also looked at what Britney's father's brother, so his name's William, what William said about Jamie and the way that he would get drunk and be violent in front of Britney, and how on one occasion she was screaming. Britney has talked about being afraid of her father, and last time she spoke up, she used the word terrified. And considering what she went through when she was a child, and what a scary man he was, that he could get drunk and be completely out of control, have, throw things at the wall that smash, shout, and so on. And we know that she's had a restraining order against him because of the way he broke a door down and grabbed her son and shook him. We also know that he said things to Britney that were really abusive, like he called her a fat whore, for instance. So he's an abusive, scary man that she's grown up with. When you have a scary parent as a child, you don't have any power, so you're going to do what it takes to stay in their good books and to keep them calm. And Britney seems to me to have always been a compliant person, and I think she would have learnt to be that way when she was a child. In another video, I talked about how she didn't know she could fight the conservatorship, but even so, if she wasn't such a compliant person, I think we all would have known that she didn't want to be under a conservatorship a long time ago. She would have used her voice, and she would have done all she could to tell us about it. And I think she would have done that even though her father was blackmailing her with how often she could see her kids. Because if you believe in your own voice and you believe that you don't have to be a compliant person, you don't have to follow everyone's rules, then you can't help yourself. You have to speak out if something doesn't feel right. From when Britney was very little, from the age of 2, she was already going to classes. So she did voice classes, she did dance classes, she was doing gymnastics when she was a little bit older, but not much older. She was doing beauty pageants. So she was doing all of these things. And this is what her mother had to say about it.
I have to laugh when I hear people call me stage mom, because right now I can see one of my students that I taught. He's now an English professor in a small community college. I'm a teacher at heart. The stage mom was not my choice, and I never was.
So right right from the age of 2, she decided to educate herself in all of these ways that would, help her to become this pop star. She was working at the age of 11. Again, was this Britney's idea then? And obviously this wasn't the mother pushing her to be a pop star. It doesn't make a lot of sense because Britney was too young to make these decisions for herself. So this means, I think, that Britney has experienced gaslighting since she was really little. She's been led to believe that it was her decision to do all of these classes and to become a pop star. It's not surprising that when Britney started to do well, she said this.
My beautiful, sweet family for just instilling in me the love of music, just teaching me diligence, perseverance, and always sacrifice no matter what the cost. I love you.
She believed her parents had made these sacrifices all for her benefit because that was what she'd been taught. And they had made sacrifices because all of these classes would have cost a lot of money and her parents were really struggling. And on top of this, as I mentioned in the last video, they were having fights regularly. They weren't getting on at all and they ended up getting a divorce. I expect Britney would have felt under a lot of pressure to succeed because of what her parents spent on her. Because of all of the arguments, her success would have taken everyone's minds off poverty and arguments. She needed to be the grateful good girl who made them proud. And that has gone on and become more and more frightening to the point where it seems to me that she's experienced gaslighting about her own sanity. She's been treated as if she's completely delusional. Not as if she's somebody who, if she doesn't take her medication, can sometimes have delusions, but as someone who is constantly unable to trust their thoughts and feelings because she's not even allowed a phone. She's not even allowed, she says, to sit next to her boyfriend in the car when he's driving. She says she's not even allowed to have children with him. Being a people pleaser is a great way to calm down an angry parent because you're rolling over, it's like you're a puppy saying, I'm not a threat, I'm not going to hurt you, I just want to be your friend. And Britney seems to have been very good at that. And it seems that that has worked in the family's favour. Her father talks about how she was like a mother to her sister. In an Instagram post for her sister's birthday last April, Britney said, "It's weird to say that I was basically your mama when we were younger." Why couldn't Britney be a kid? Why did she need to be a mother? So that suggests to me as well that Britney's mum wasn't emotionally supportive enough for the two of them, for her and her sister. And Britney took on that role. She's doing what's needed for her family. When Britney's brother was asked who his favourite sister was, this is what he said.
Oh, Lord. I can't really answer that about getting in trouble, but there definitely is one, I promise you that.
My guess is that Britney is his favourite sister. In the last video, I looked at what Jamie said about Britney's sister. She was the rebel. She was the one that did whatever she wanted and was a troublemaker, according to him. Whereas Britney was the motherly one. Britney was the good girl.
Well, let me ask you this, though. Did you ever, once, call her up and or she calls you and maybe it's late at night and you're just kind of groggy and you're like, hey, it's Brian, who is this? And then she just go, it's Britney, bitch. And you're like, maybe it was just real. And you're like, man, that just happened. Cool.
Well, I got a lot of those late night phone calls. Don't get me wrong. But typically it was I was like on the one being like, wake up, or I was being the one being an idiot. So
the experiences Britney had as a child with her father when he was drunk and violent would have been traumatic. And when you experience something that's traumatic enough, and especially if it happens continuously, as it did for Britney, then those effects can last and they can stay in your nervous system when you're an adult. If you learn that speaking up and being assertive is going to land you in danger, your nervous system learns that as well. So you can re-traumatize yourself just with the thought that you're going to stand up for yourself, or just with the thought that you're going to express your anger towards somebody, because your body knows that that's a dangerous thing to do, or at least it was when you were a child. So that's why it can be so hard to get out of the habit of being a pushover, of being a people pleaser, because you're wired to stay that way for your own safety. So because of that, a lot of people who were afraid of a parent have ended up being people pleasers, because that way they don't have to find themselves in those situations. They don't have to get triggered, you know, they can avoid that whole situation. And so as a result, they really lose out. It means that even though they don't have to experience all of that, they don't get the things they want in life. They don't get treated with the respect they want to be treated with, because people get to realize that they're not going to stand up for themselves, or they get to see that when they do, they're really shaken up and affected by it, which means that they're not sure of themselves. They're not feeling strong in themselves. They're not ready to defend themselves. You know, they're targets, and being a target makes people, that encourages people not to respect you. And when I say people, well, I'm talking about people who are going to exploit that. I certainly don't mean everyone, because thankfully most people won't even notice that, because they're not looking for it. You know, they're not looking for somebody to bully. Her brother doesn't talk about Britney's success as if it's her own success, as if it's down to all of her hard work.
I mean, at the time we're moving 10, 15 million CDs, on an album. So, I mean, the volume was massive, it wasn't just downloads. It wasn't all digital. My thing was new business development. That's what I kind of focused on, which was the branding and, creating the Elizabeth Arden fragrance line with her. And just that alone has done over $100 billion in sales.
There's a movement called the Free Britney movement.
Just to see that kind of like interest in society today, like to care that much about her and everyone in this family. We truly appreciate it.
Jacqueline Butcher was a friend of the Spears family, and she was present when the conservatorship was first granted. According to Butcher, Jamie would yell that he was Britney Spears every time he was challenged, to show that he had control over her life. And it seems to me that it also shows that he didn't see her as a person. He saw her really as a commodity, or as an object that he had full control over, that he had made her who she is, and that there was nothing more to her, just everything he had created. So in a way, he's casting himself as a god. If you believe that you have created your daughter, that really you are the one who's behind her success, then you have to see her as less than she is. And he does. And Britney behaves as if she's less than she is in response, because that's how she's been taught to feel about herself. Sometimes when she talks, she has a sort of little girl demeanour, and I think that that's something she would have fallen back on since childhood, making herself small so that he didn't feel threatened. And possibly also for the benefit of her mum, and I'll talk about her mum in a bit. But I think when you make yourself smaller and when you try to be on the right side of a parent when you're growing up, that then continues on into adulthood, and it creates a people pleaser. Butcher had said to Lynn, do you think that maybe you and Jamie should both be managing this conservatorship rather than him doing it on his own? And Lynn had said that she'd rather that Britney was angry with her dad and not her. She wants him to be the enemy and not her. So it's not about protecting her daughter from the conservatorship or really trying to fight her ex-husband. It's just about herself and how she wants to be viewed by her daughter. And when she was being interviewed for a magazine article by a journalist, Lynn Spears apparently said to him down the phone that if anyone from the family came into the room, she would have to put the phone down immediately. That suggests to me, again, that it's dangerous to have your own voice in the Spears family. That Lynn would be expected to follow the invisible rules that everybody else in the family needs to follow. That's what happens when you have a narcissist parent. People's voices aren't their own. They aren't able to be individuals. They all speak as one voice. And if they don't, they're bullied into place or they're ejected from the family. If you're ejected from the family, what that can mean is that you're the scapegoat, you're the outcast. Nobody talks to you anymore, or they talk to you enough to invite you along to family gatherings and then they ignore you when you're there. You know, they talk about you behind your back. They spread gossip about you. There's smear campaigns about you and so on. So you need to stay in line. You know, you need to allow your strings to be pulled by the puppet master. And in this case, I think the puppet master is Jamie Spears. I'm going to leave it here and continue in the next video, which I'm going to put out tomorrow. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and I'll see you then. And I tried to make this last week after I'd had the COVID jab, and this is what happened. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. To be fair, I think about half of that tiredness was actually from the COVID jab, and the rest of it was from the fact that I'd been up till 2 a.m. the night before, thinking that I was going to feel terrible the next day because of all the media hype about the COVID jab. So I was trying to make the most of feeling well and watching Netflix, and actually I was just tired the next day. I didn't feel the slightest bit ill. And I had Panadol by the bed, just, you know, I took the day off and everything, just waiting to feel horrendous.